Good morning, my name is Bernie. I am a recovering industrial farmer. I've been recovering since about 1995. And one of the early inspirations that made me start to question what I was doing, there was a lot of things, but one of the persons that I've got to listen to because of my association with the Small Farm Conference as both a participant and now on a committee, John Ikerd, through the years has given me much to think about. And for a student to be able to introduce a teacher is an honor. And I feel this deep gratitude for a number of reasons, but I see someone that doesn't have to be doing this, and he's still running. He's approaching 75, I'm estimating. And he's still running, and he's still teaching. And that, in and of itself, is admirable, in my humble opinion. The last time John was here was in 2005. And we were having lunch together, an aspiring lion warrior and a rainbow warrior, and John talked about core values. And I asked him to repeat the core values so I could write them down, and those core values have been close to my desk where I can look at them, and I try to make decisions and interact according to those values. And John, as you'll find out in a minute, is pretty enthusiastic. But that particular day, it resonated with me when he talked about that. And these are values that everybody, all of humanity, all those 400 million farmers, we'd all agree, and beyond that, the whole world can agree on these values. And that is compassion, fairness, honesty, respect, and responsibility. I'm blessed today to honor who I would call a primary teacher, a great man. On behalf of the Small Farm Conference Committee, please join me in welcoming John Ikerd.
It's always nice to be flattered, you know. I don't deserve the introduction such as that, but it always makes you feel good, and I hope the rest of you have an opportunity at some time in your life to be introduced as well, and with as much respect as I have been here today. I'm honored to be here today, to be back at this conference after several years. Now, when you come back to a place, you're invited back, it puts an added responsibility on you. Because when you show up the first time, most people have never heard of you and don't know who you are and don't know what to expect. So if you just do a halfway decent job, you know, they're relieved and and they appreciate everything that you do. But when people invite you back, they have certain expectations that you have to live up to. So I feel under a good bit of pressure here this morning to live up to the expectations of those people that invited me back. I was glad to be able to come in yesterday and meet with a group, I've forgotten the exact name, but the Michigan Food and Farming, or Farm Coalition, I think it was, the group from all people involved in the local food movement here in this particular community. And I was glad to see and reaffirm that the local food movement is alive and well and growing here as it is all across the country. I was pleased also to have an opportunity to listen to Patty Cantrell's fine presentation there yesterday. You know, it's really encouraging to old people like me to know that there's a new generation of very intelligent and articulate young people such as Patty that are coming on to continue this good food movement long into the future after P and many people like me are long gone from this earth. I was also pleased to hear Patty kind of have the courage to stand up and challenge some of the conventional wisdom. And I think that's what we're going to have to do, is challenge the conventional wisdom that's out there today, that the economic bottom line is all that matters. We're going to have to move away from that, and I intend to do the same thing here today. Now, typically, when I start a presentation like this, I know that there will be people that don't necessarily agree with me, but that's fine, because what I say is my truth. It's what I believe to be true. Now, if your truth is different from mine, that's all right with me, because I don't think any of us should be so egotistical as to think that only we have the truth. Now, I speak my truth with conviction because I know why I believe what I believe, and all I ask of you is that you know why you believe what you believe in support of your truth. And in my opinion, just because some so-called expert said something or you read something somewhere is not a very good reason to claim it as your truth. We all need to ask questions and to decide for ourselves what we believe and what we don't believe, and to claim our truth. And I think by articulating our truth and sharing it with each other, we'll come closer to the truth. The conventional wisdom I want to challenge today with my presentation is that small farms aren't real farms. I'm here to tell you that small farms, in fact, are real farms. That's the theme of this conference, and that's the theme of my presentation. I first addressed this idea of small farms as real farms back in the early 90s when I first started working in sustainable agriculture. And I've come back to it several times since and have written on it several times since. And it's the title of a book that they have in the display area that I'd be willing to sign this afternoon if anybody cares to buy one of them sometime. But I came back to that book. I keep coming back to that because over time I come increasingly to the conclusion that small farms are the only farms that are actually sustainable over the long run. They're the only farms with a future because they're sustainable. And in fact, they are the only real farms. Now, there's a lot of people out here, many of them that I respect, that say sustainability is not a matter of size, that you can have a sustainable farming operation, large or small or any way in between. Well, I would agree, just because a small farm is small doesn't mean that it's sustainable, and many small farms today and in the past are not sustainable. So I would agree that the size doesn't determine it, but I've come to the conclusion that many of the farms today, in fact, the large farms that dominate the total agriculture of this production, quite simply are too large to be sustainable over the long run. Now, how big is big and how small is small? That's questions that always comes up when you talk about small farms, and it's quite obvious that a small beef cattle operation is going to have more acres than a large poultry operation, or that a large vegetable farm is going to be smaller than a small wheat farm, and that small farms in one part of the world would be large in another part of the world. I've come back to the idea of saying that small and large is mainly in the minds of the farmer. Now, USDA comes out and says, well, a small farm is anything less than $250,000 sales a year, and others say 50,000 should be the limit, and I'd probably choose somewhere in between, but I still think it's more a matter of what's in the mind of the farmer than it is the size of the dollars of sales out on the farm. I think a farmer that's out here that's saying, I could make this work if I simply had more land and more money, is a large farmer. I don't care how small the farm is. They're thinking like a large farmer. If I just had more, if I had more land or more money. And I think somebody that's out here on a farm that is always looking for some way to make a better life with less land and less money is a small farmer, regardless of how many acres they're farming today. Because it's a difference in how you go about making decisions and managing. And I still think that that's an appropriate designation. But given that, I think there are farms today that are simply too large to be sustainable. I think there's an absolute size beyond which a cattle farm, a poultry farm, a wheat farm, a vegetable operation becomes too large to be managed sustainably. Now, the so-called experts would say that small farms are a thing of the past, that they're not the farms of the future. And what they're doing is they're simply looking at the trends, and they look at the trends over the past 50, 100 years or so, and they see that farms have trended toward becoming fewer and becoming larger over time. And they simply extrapolate that trend into the future and say farms are going to continue to get larger and fewer as we go into the future. Well, you know, if that trend is right, then we're in big trouble. Because the farms today are too big to be sustainable. They're certainly not going to be sustainable as they get larger. But the good news is that trends never go in the same direction over the long run. Trends always change. They never continue. The world operates in cycles. A few years back, there was an article in Science magazine, which is one of the two most, or Science Journal, which is one of the two most respected journals in the world. And it was written by a couple of young scientists that were proposing 20 great ideas in science. And they said, these things are so important that everyone in our society ought to understand these. It ought to be in the school and everywhere. And there were such things as the laws of gravity and laws of motion and thermodynamics and so on. But on that list of top 20 great ideas was this idea that everything on Earth operates in cycles. And they put the article out and asked for comments, and there were a few comments that some people said, well, everything on Earth tends to operate in cycles, but nobody really pulled that off of the top 10 list. So farms aren't going to get large forever. We're going through a period of time when farms are going to reverse. It's like the kind of a fundamental principle of nature. You can think about a pendulum on a grandfather's clock. It swings back and forth. When it goes so far in one direction, gravity pulls it back. Maybe it's easier to think of when you were a kid and swinging in a swing. What was happening? You would go this direction. You didn't go up and over the top unless you were going pretty fast. You get out here somewhere and gravity starts pulling against the momentum and it comes back. And if you go up too far, you come down with a bang. But when you go too far in one direction, whether you're talking about economic cycles or business cycles or cycles of the moon or cycles of the seasons, when you go too far in one direction, nature, by its very fundamental nature, takes you back in another direction and operate in cycles. Everything operates in cycles. And so the trend in agriculture is not going to go on forever. Eventually it's going to reverse and go in a fundamentally different direction. Now, these cycles are never truly the same. No 2 days are the same. No 2 seasons are the same. No 2 business cycles are the same. But we recognize in these cycles something that we have seen before, and that's what we'll see in the trends in agriculture. The small farms of the future won't be like the small farms of the past. We have new knowledge that we didn't have in the past that will help us make those farms more sustainable. We have new technology. We have new know-how that can be fit to small farms in spite of the fact we've done very little research to help small farmers do that. And the small farms of the future will be fundamentally better than the small farms of the past in terms of taking care of nature and taking care of the communities and taking care of the families that are on those small farms. But they will have many of the same characteristics, the same fundamental characteristics that made small farms of the past real farms will make the sustainable farms of the future real farms, and they will be small farms. We already see the signs of reversal. We see the slow of momentum toward industrial agriculture with the growing realization on the part of a larger and larger number of people that there's something fundamentally wrong with the food system, this industrial food system that we've developed. That's what the local food movement is about. There's something fundamentally wrong with the direction, the trend that we've been going. And we see many farmers across the country that have already changed directions, and I suspect many of you here today fall in that category, and we see it in the local food movement, but we saw it earlier in the organic food movement. We see it in community-based food systems of all the time. There's people that are changing directions. It doesn't change all at once, but the pendulum is beginning to swing back. The so-called experts, again, they underestimate the importance of this. They call it a fringe movement, niche farming, and things of this nature because they fail to realize that this reversal is taking place within the context of a larger reversal within the whole of society. We're in the midst of what I call a great transition within our society. Every 200 years or so, we go through these periods of time because when things aren't working the way they did and we feel they aren't going to work in the future, we have to re-examine our worldview. We have to rethink how the world works and where we fit within it so we can decide differently how to live our lives. And that's where we are today. I think the transition we're involved in today is at least as big as the Industrial Revolution, probably beginning as big as the beginning of science about 400 years ago. It could well be the greatest civilizational shift that's ever been experienced by humanity. I'm an old man, going on 75, yeah. And I've seen a lot of changes in my lifetime, but I think the changes that I've seen will pale in comparison to the changes that you young people here will see today in your lifetime. I'm glad to see more and more young people, and the young people here, because you're going to have to create a fundamentally new and different world in which you're going to live your life if it's going to be sustainable. This great transition that I'm talking about are driven by the questions of sustainability. The question of sustainability basically is, how do we meet the needs of the present without diminishing opportunities of those of the future? And when we ask that question honestly and fairly about our society, our economy, our agriculture today, the answer to that question is that we're not meeting the basic needs of many people of the world today, including many people in the United States. And we most certainly are not leaving equal or better opportunities for those people of the future. We've created an unsustainable society, an unsustainable economy, an unsustainable agriculture. Change is no longer just an option, it is an absolute necessity. It's an imperative. We must change. Nowhere is this need for change more evident, more clear than in American agriculture, in spite of all of the propaganda to the contrary. You know, we're told by the so-called agricultural establishment, the large agribusiness corporations, the big commodity organizations, Farm Bureau organization, I'll just call it by name, and land-grant universities and USDA and most state departments of agriculture. There are exceptions within all of those organizations, thankfully. We're told by them that we have the food system that's the envy of everybody in the world. They point to the fact that we spend less than 10% of our disposable income on average on food, arguably less than any place else in the world. We have a wide variety of products in the supermarkets that are available year-round. What more could we want? We've created a food system that's quick, convenient, and cheap. So why are we complaining? Why should we want to change from that? Well, first of all, we've accomplished this quick, convenient food system by industrializing agriculture and industrializing the food system. See, industrialization is most people think, is not just about moving from an agrarian to a manufacturing society. That's just a symptom of industrialization. Industrialization is about specialization, standardization, and consolidation of control. You specialize so you're doing fewer things so you can do them better and you can do them faster. But once you've specialized, you have to standardize the individual components then so that they fit together. And once you've standardized, then you can routinize, mechanize, simplify. Once you've done that, then you can consolidate control of the operations into larger and larger units, which allows you to achieve what we economists call economies of scale. And that's what we've seen. That's what we've seen in agriculture and over the past 50, 60 years in particular. We've created a very efficient agriculture, but at the same time, we've seen that the farms grow larger and they grow fewer. Because when we specialized and simplified, then we actually forced the farms to become larger and to become fewer in order to survive. And all of that, the most important part, all of that is driven by the economic bottom line, because specialization, standardization, consolidation, the whole industrial process is driven by the idea that we're going to make the system work more economically efficiently, presumably for the greater good of society. And what we've done is we've created a very economically efficient agriculture. That's where the cheap, convenient food comes from. But now we're realizing that there were unintended consequences. There were unintended ecological, social, and economic costs. And over time, the benefits, the economic benefits continue to diminish, whereas the ecological and social costs continue to rise. And that's where we are today. We can see the reflections of this kind of agriculture when we see the moving away from the diversified family farms of the past to the large specialized operations where we see the monocrops of wheat, corn, wheat and rice and cotton across the country, and I call it a diacrop out in the Midwest, the corn and soybeans year after year. That's the specialization. We see it in the livestock operations where we specialize in particular phase of livestock operations, most notably in the large-scale confinement animal feeding operations. We see in agriculture as a consequence of that standardization, we're increasingly reliant on fossil energy for mechanization and for fertilizers and pesticides to try to control nature so that we can make the farm and the feedlots work like assembly lines or work like factories without rules. And we've seen the farms become larger and they become fewer. We see the ecological consequences of that in the erosion, depletion of the natural productivity of the soil, the pollution of the air and the water with agricultural chemicals and biological waste, the depletion of the aquifers and of other non-renewable resources, and now the using of fossil energy, the dependence on fossil energy, which we're not out yet, but the fossil energy from here on out is going to be more expensive, both in economic cost and environmental consequences, as we can see today with the consequences of the fracking for natural gas and the mountaintop mining across the southeast. These are the consequences of industrialization. It's a consequence of a system that's driven not by ethics, but by economics. We see the social consequences in the decline of family farms and the demise of rural communities. As the farms become larger, they become fewer, which meant fewer families not only to shop on the main street in the town, but families to go to the churches and keep the schools open and participate in the leadership within the counties. We've seen the decline and decay of rural areas all across this country. I've spent my whole life growing up on a farm and working with people in rural communities, and I've seen this happen over and over throughout the years. And we proclaim the right to farm in spite of the fact that it's degrading and destroying the ecological and social quality of life in our rural communities. Folks, the right to farm was never meant to be interpreted as a right to run a factory that degrades your neighbor's quality of life and destroys the natural environment. This is the consequence of farming for the economic bottom line. Driven by economic value, not concern for nature, not for concerns for society. Nature and society are the foundations for economic sustainability and the good of the whole. And the second reason I talk about that the system has failed is it's failed to provide food security for the nation, the most fundamental purpose. I spent the first half of my 30-year academic career promoting promoting industrial agriculture. Why was I doing that? Because I was told that we were going to make good, wholesome food affordable to everyone. It was about providing food security. I believed that. I believed that's what we were going to do. Food security means that everyone has enough good, wholesome food to support an active, healthy lifestyle. But after 60 years of doing that, we have failed. We have absolutely failed, and the statistics are there. There are more hungry people in this country today than there were in the 1960s. The latest reports are that something over 15% of all people live in food insecure homes or food insecure, and almost a quarter of our children live in food insecure homes where they're not sure that there's going to be enough food to get them through to the end of the month. And by the way, the Green Revolution didn't feed more people. That was an industrial model that basically drove subsistence farmers that were feeding their families reasonably well off of the farms and into the cities where they remain hungry and unemployed in the slums. And the face of food insecurity today is different than it was in the past, because in many cases the people that can afford to get enough food, the food that they can afford is high in calories, loaded in calories, but lacking in essential nutrients that keeps them hungry, even though they're getting too many calories. We see the consequences of that in obesity and the related diseases of diabetes and heart disease and and high blood pressure and various forms of cancer. The Robert Woods Johnson Foundation estimated recently that by the year 2020, 1/5 of the total health care costs in this country would be associated with obesity and the related diseases. And if you add in the health risk associated with the use of agricultural chemicals and hormones and antibiotic resistance, we're probably talking about 1/3 or more of the total health care costs that are associated with this industrial agriculture, industrial food system, American diet. We've seen the cost of health care in this country more than double in the last 30 years as the cost of food goes down, which I think may not be a coincidence. Now taking 17% of the total gross national product. And if that trend continues, by the year 2040, we'll be spending 1/3 of the total economic output of this country will be spent on health care, folks. We've created an unsustainable food system. We cannot afford the increasing high cost of cheap food. It's time for something fundamentally different. It's time for a change. We've got to move in a fundamentally different direction. There are many people out there that live in denial today. They keep hoping for another technological fix, even though many of the problems we have today are a result of technological fix of the past, and they're depending upon genetic engineering, genetically modified organisms, or global positioning systems to guide the farms, to turn farmers into robots. But these are false hope, because they are supporting a system that are in conflict with the fundamental laws of nature. And when you get in arguments with nature, nature always has the last word, and will have too. But there's a turning in our society. There's a growing awakening among the people. There's a growing vision of a different worldview. There's a growing realization that we're not apart from the world. The world is not here just for our use, but we're a part of the world. The whole of society is within nature, and the whole of the economy is the whole of the economy is within the whole of society. We're all part of this same whole. We have to learn to live in harmony with nature, to respect the laws of nature, including the laws of human nature, or what they used to call natural law. There's a growing awareness that happiness isn't just about having more and more stuff, more income, more wealth. That there are important ethical and social dimensions to happiness that have to do with relationships and the sense of purpose and meaning in life. We saw the beginning of that great turning in our worldview. We saw it beginning back in the 1960s with the environmental movement, the civil rights movement, the peace movement of that time. That was a questioning then among the farmers and among the people within the community as a whole. But we saw the defenders of the status quo come in whenever we began to pass legislation like the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, and the Civil Rights Act of the 1960s and 70s. The defenders of the status quo fought back because there's economic cost associated with doing things for the good of society and the good of future of humanity. And so now we're seeing the consequences of basically 30 years of denial and retreat from that earlier vision of creating a new world. But the financial crisis of 2008, I think, is relighting the fires of revolution and relighting the fires of change, because we're told that we have to sacrifice our ecological and social values just so we can keep the economy growing. And now we see the economy can't be kept growing unless we take care of nature and take care of society as well. We've seen the changes in agriculture, probably most visibly in the organic movement. It really began, that new organic movement began in the 60s, about the same time as the environmental civil rights movement. It didn't grow much during the 70s and 80s, even though the people were still there. It was made up of the back to the earth people, but also farmers and other people that didn't change the way they farmed just because the so-called experts told them industrial agriculture was the way of the future. But we saw the organic movement begin to grow in the 1990s, and it grew at a rate of 20% per year in the 90s and the early 2000s, doubling every 3 or 4 years during that period of time. And even during the Great Recession, it's continued to grow at a rate of about 10% per year. It still amounts to less than 5% of the total food that's sold out here today, but it amounts to more than 12% of the fruits and vegetables, which is a pretty remarkable increase over such a short period of time within an industrial food system. But we also saw the defenders of the status quo move forward in the organic movement as well and try to take it over. The early people, the back to the earth people and those farmers that hung on, you see, organic wasn't just about reducing certain kind of inputs and adding other inputs or things of this nature. It was basically a rejection of that mechanistic industrial worldview. It was about a biological system. It was about treating the farm as a biological whole, as Rudolf Steiner would say it. But it was also about creating a sustainable agriculture. It was about a responsibility to society, as Sir Albert Howard said, creating a permanent agriculture to support a permanent society. The organic movement was as much or more a philosophy of life, a way of living, as it was a particular way of farming. But as that market grew, the potential for profit began to stand out to the people that were in the industrial food system, and they wanted a piece of that. But they realized that industrial model, you have to standardize things if you're going to specialize and consolidate control. And so we've had the movement for national organic standards, which seemed like a good idea at the time. But what it did is it allowed then whoever could meet the minimum standards at the lowest cost, basically anywhere in the world, could take over the market. And we saw that change. We saw it in the way organic foods were retailed. By 2007, 47% of the organic foods were retailed through mainstream markets, 46% through the large collection of what had been independent cooperative chains in organizations such as Whole Foods and Trader Joe's, and it had 46%, it left only 7% for the farmers markets, the CSAs and things of that nature. What we saw in organic agriculture was specialization, standardization, consolidation of control. It not only happened within the food system, it happened at the farm level as the farms that had originally been small farms, organic farms, began to be taken over, at least the volume was taken over by large specialized farms in California and Mexico and various other places, and a large share of the organic today is imported from industrial operations in other countries. With this industrialization of organic, that's where the local food movement come from. As people lost confidence in the organic label, then they began to say, I want food that has ecological and social integrity, not just a list of allowable and non-allowable inputs or a list of required practices. I want to have confidence and trust in my food. I'm going to buy from people that I know or could know, and from people that I trust to produce foods in ways that are consistent with my social and ethical values, not just with a set of standards somewhere. And we saw that begin to grow in the farmers' roadside stands and the farmers' markets and the CSAs. And by 2011, the estimate indicated that about $11 billion worth of organic food was sold, about a third as large as the organic movement. But local had clearly taken over as being the most dynamic sector of the American food systems. USDA keeps records on farmers markets. We saw the number of farmers markets move from less than 1,800 to more than 8,000 between 94 and 2013, a quadrupling in a period of 20 years. The number of CSAs increased from 100 in 1990 up to 2,700 in 2009. And USDA reports some 12,500 farmers in 2009 that were selling through CSAs, which reflects kind of a multi-farm CSAs where farmers go together, supply the CSA. I think that's the new movement that's taking over today. It's where farmers are coming together to provide a wider variety of product. I call them multi-farm CSAs. They're collaboratives or alliances or food hubs would fall into that same category. I gave some examples in the paper that I provided for the conference of grown locally up in Decorah, Iowa, that has all of their customers within about 30, 40 miles of Decorah, none of the big cities up there. There's, I think 12 or 14 or 18 farmers maybe that are involved in that today. But then there's Idaho's Bounty out in southern Idaho that basically includes all of the farmers that sell direct in southern Idaho, and their cooperative includes the customers as well as the farmers. And then there's organizations such as the Viroqua Food Co-op in Viroqua, Wisconsin, and Good Natured Family Farms down in Kansas City, and they have like 180 in one of those and 200 and some farmers in the other. There's the Oklahoma Food Co-op that covers the whole state out there. I don't know how many that they have. They're a little different, but they're in line. The Oklahoma Food Co-op website lists 20 other states that have similar programs. You go to the USDA Agricultural Marketing Service, they list more than 235 what they call food hubs. I can't vouch for the integrity of all those. There's probably some of those that are driven solely by economic interest of coming together, and I say, if so, they will not be sustainable, but I know many of those are driven by shared social and ethical values that are required for sustainability. The advantages of these cooperatives or collaboratives or food hubs or whatever we want to call them, they offer a customer a wider variety of options. There's a variety of order options. You can be a member of a CSA or have a standing order, or you can go online each week and order from the farmers from what's available that week. You can have delivery options. You can go to the farm, pick it up, go to a delivery point, or they'll deliver it to your home. A wide variety of products, not just fruits and vegetables, but meat and milk and eggs and honey and bread and a whole range of things. It's becoming possible to really sit down and kind of go to one or two places and really get all your food located within your local community. But the thing that will make these operations sustainable, and I truly believe this is the beginning of a vision of a totally new food system. But the thing that will make it sustainable is the integrity of the personal connections among the people that are involved in those collaborative organizations. If those are to be sustainable, those farms will remain appropriately small. If it becomes too big, it'll become not sustainable. And why do they become too big? Because as they become successful, they see the opportunity to make more money if they become larger. And to become larger, they say we need to specialize, we need to standardize, so that we can consolidate control. And no matter which direction you start, if you are driven by profitability over ecological social responsibility, you will end up right back where you started from. If you want an economically efficient food system, look at it. That's what you have. And until we change from being driven by the economic bottom line, as opposed to be driven by social and ecological responsibility for less fortunate in our community and for the future of humanity, we'll continue to go in circles. The problem is not that you have economic viability is absolutely essential for sustainability, but when you begin to put priority on profits over land and people, you destroy the profitability of the system. It's about that paradigm of specialization, standardization, consolidation of control for economic efficiency. And when the focus becomes profits rather than sustainability, the farms become large. They become to exploit and extract from nature because it's less costly. It's more profitable to exploit and extract than it is to regenerate and renew, to make investments for the future from which you'll see no return. You know, certainly large farms can reduce their negative ecological impact and their impact on the community, and we should encourage large farms to do that to the maximum extent that's possible, to reduce the sustainability and maintain the quality of life to the extent that we can in rural areas. And certainly large farms can substitute renewable energy for the non-renewable energy and move in a positive direction. While those things are necessary, though, they are simply not sufficient. Because to have sustainability, we must be willing to invest in things for which there's no economic return and no economic value. We've got to do things for the good of society simply because they're the right things to do. We've got to do things that are good for nature and the future of humanity simply because they're the right thing to do. I can tell you as an economist that economic value as we know it today is inherently individual, instrumental, and impersonal. It's individual in that it occurs to an individual. A whole economy is nothing more than a collection of individuals. There's no economic value even in taking care of the good of the whole of an economy, as we saw with the economic financial crash. That's what happened there. Individuals seeking individual economic well-being. The decisions they made were perfectly rational from an economic standpoint. It's instrumental. It's a means to an end. And I can tell you, folks, it makes no economic sense to invest in anything if the return will come after you're dead. You won't be here. There's no way to realize it. So the only way sustainability makes sense, meeting the needs of the present without diminishing opportunities for the future, is if we're willing to make investments for which we will never see the economic return. The investments for the good of society and the future of humanity. Large farms are not unsustainable because they are large, They are large because they are unsustainable, because they were managed to maximize profitability. Sustainability will require a fundamentally different worldview than the worldview of the past. We're not apart from the world, we're a part of the world. It's not this industrial worldview of mechanization and domination. It's looking at a biological system, and we have to learn to live in harmony and balance with that biological system. We are a part of nature. We are parts of we're living organisms that are parts of living systems, of communities, and so on. Farms are living systems. It's only living systems that have the capacity to capture solar energy, to regenerate and renew, which is ultimately the only source of sustainability. We have to radically redesign our farms and rethink our society and rethink our community. And when we do that, when we redesign and rethink in a way that accommodates the needs of nature, what Wendell Berry says, what nature will allow us to do here. He said in his interview with Bill Moyers, he said, we don't have a right to ask whether or not we're going to succeed. We only have the right to ask, what would nature have us do here, and then find the courage to do it with no thought of where we go in the future. And when we look to nature as the way that we need to design our farms and rethink our farms, they will become smaller, because the niches in nature are far smaller than are the farms that are trying to farm those niches today. And the communities, the needs of communities are far smaller than the industrial food system is trying to supply and treat us all as if we're the same. And as we look towards sustainability, the farms will become naturally smaller, because that will be what nature requires. That will be what culture requires. What we need is a fundamentally different culture, or a return to the culture that was there in the past. So what's culture? Culture is what a society develops to kind of determine the appropriate relationship between individuals within that society and the good of that community or society as a whole. It's culture that defines those limits within which we function within the bounds of a community, so that we have actually the maximum of freedom, because the maximum of freedom depends upon us not imposing cost on our neighbors and other people within our community. That's what culture is about. It's those core values. And when you have a culture of a particular place, such as northern Michigan, it's a reflection of how people in that particular place have learned to accommodate the needs of nature in that place. It's how people have learned to get along with each other and to relate to the nature. And we not only need those connections with other people within the culture to meet our basic needs for survival and sustenance, but we need those connections because we're social beings. We need to love and be loved and care and be cared for, and so we need a caring community within which to carry on our individual action. And we need those relationships with nature because we're a part of it. We need that sense of connectedness that gives us purpose, that feels and gives us the sense of responsibility to caring for the nature, for not just for the good of humanity, but for the good of the whole, not in the present, but on into the future. It's a culture that limits the size of the farms and the size of the operations because it limits the motives and it limits the means by which we pursue that. We need to return to the culture of real farms, the real farms of the past, the small farms of the past. I looked up the word farm on Wikipedia just to see what farms had meant, and it goes back to it goes all the way back to Middle English. It's where it started, in Old English and Proto-German, and I put it in the paper. You can see all those various words, but the thing that struck me is every single one of those words had multiple meaning. A farm has never meant just one thing. In all of those languages, through all of the times, it's always meant several different things, and there's always one component of it that we would call economics. It's about revenue, it's about rent, it's about earning a living, but there's always a component of that word that's about social, it's about community, it's about festival, it's about sustenance, and there's always a part of it that's about ethics, it's about sustain, affirm, permanence. Farming has always had multiple meanings. It's never just been a business. I used to go out and tell farming has to be a bottom line business if you're going to survive. That was wrong. That's never been what a real farm is about. It's about taking care of the earth and taking care of people and taking care of ourselves. Certainly that's important. What we're talking about is sustainable agriculture. That's not new. That's what farming was always about up until a few decades ago. It's always been about economics and society and community and about ecology and ethics and responsibility for the future. You know, Wendell Berry probably puts it more eloquently than about anybody I know. He puts things into words that really stick with you, but he talks about sustainability in terms of maintaining the health of the land, the culture of agriculture. And he says if the land is to be used well, as he talks about, he says that we must know the land well. We must be motivated to treat the land well. We must know how to treat the land or to use the land well. We must be able to afford to use it well. And he goes on in an essay called A Measure of Nature, and he says that if farms are to be farmed sustainably, I'm paraphrasing there, but he says that we farmers must be farming farms that they know and love, farms small enough to know and love, using tools that they know and love, in the presence of neighbors that they know and love, and I would argue producing food for people that they know and love. And you know what, folks? You can only know and love just so much land, and you can only truly know and love just so many people, and that limits the size of the farms, the size of the meaningful connections that you can have with the land that you farm and the people that you farm with and the people that you farm for. That's the reason that farms of the future, the sustainable farms, must be appropriately small, because we must know and love the land and know and love our neighbors and know and love our customers and know and love and believe in the inherent goodness of nature, society, and the future of humanity. The trends of the past will not continue into the future. We tend to forget when we look at agriculture that we've had big farms before that broke up. We had the feudal landlords that had the serfdoms, and they all broke up and divided out. We had the big plantations of the South in this country that were farmed by slaves, and they all broke up and went a different direction. More recently, we had the giant collective farms of the Soviet Union that were put together, and they all broke up, and they went in a direction. In all those cases, they're collecting them back down into larger and larger farms again, but once again, they will break up. Once again, they will become small farms. Once again. And if it takes a revolution to bring the change, then so be it. But we see the revolution in a peaceful form already beginning in the organic movement, the natural food movement, the local food movement, the food hubs, the community-based food system. We see people rising up and saying, we want real food, and only real food must come from real farms, not the industrial farms that we have today, but from small farms, from people that we know and people that we trust. Real farmers care about the land, they care about their customers, they care about society, and they care about the future of humanity. We're in the midst of a great renaissance, a reversal of a cycle. We're looking forward and we're moving toward a time when we once again will have dominated within this food system of not just nationally but globally. It will be real food from real farms, and those farms will be appropriately small. Thank you.